The morning began like any other in Pompeii. Shopkeepers lifted their shutters. Bakers worked beside hot stone ovens. Carts rattled over streets worn smooth by years of traffic. Above the city stood Mount Vesuvius, quiet, familiar, and almost completely misunderstood. Then, sometime around midday, people looked up. A dark cloud was rising over the mountain. At first, it resembled a tall pine tree, a narrow trunk climbing into the sky, then spreading outward into branches of ash. The sound came next, a deep, rolling concussion. And then fragments of white pumice began falling onto the city, lightly at first, almost like hail. No one in Pompeii could yet understand what the next several hours would bring. Their city was still alive, but the clock had already started. Within an hour, the harmless-looking flakes had become a relentless storm of pumice. The stones were light enough to float on water, but they accumulated quickly, across courtyards, inside rooms, and on tiled roofs never built to carry such weight. Daylight faded beneath the ash cloud. People wrapped cloth around their faces and tied cushions over their heads as crude protection. Some rushed toward the city gates. Others gathered valuables, convinced there was still time to wait. Every decision carried danger. In the streets, the pumice grew deeper, making each step slower. Inside the houses, timbers droned. Roofs began collapsing under nearly 3 meters of debris in some places, crushing those who had chosen shelter over flight. Yet the eruption had still not reached its deadliest phase. The mountain was emptying itself above Pompeii, while the column of ash climbed higher and higher. For the people below, the city they knew had become a maze of darkness, falling stone and blocked doorways. Across the Bay of Naples, a young Roman named Pliny watched the cloud rise. Years later, his letters would preserve the clearest eyewitness account of the disaster. He compared the eruption column to a pine tree, narrow at the base, spreading into branches high above the mountain. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, commanded the Roman fleet at Misenum. At first, curiosity drew him toward the eruption. Then a request for help transformed observation into rescue. Ships crossed the bay as ash and hot debris fell around them. But changing winds and rough water made the coast increasingly difficult to reach. In Pompeii, families faced the same terrible uncertainty. Leave now and risk being struck in the streets. Stay inside and risk the roof collapsing. The sea seemed like an escape, but ash obscured the shore and earthquakes disturbed the water. The roads were disappearing beneath pumice. By evening, lamps were needed at a time when the sun should still have been visible. The people of Pompeii were not frozen in place. They were making desperate choices with almost no reliable information. Night settled over a city that had already lost the sky. The eruption column began to weaken, and that made the danger worse. Material that had been held high above Vesuvius started collapsing down the mountain, producing fast-moving clouds of scorching gas, ash, and rock. These were pyroclastic surges, far more lethal than the falling pumice. The first surges struck Herculaneum, closer to the volcano, burying streets and buildings beneath superheated material. Pompeii remained just beyond their reach for a little longer. That delay may have saved those who had already escaped, but thousands were still in and around the city. Some sheltered in ground floor rooms, some tried to cross the deep pumice in darkness. Others carried coins, jewelry, keys, or household objects, small signs that they expected to return. Earthquakes shook damaged walls. Ash entered through every opening. Breathing became harder, and beyond the northern walls, the surges were advancing. By now, the problem was no longer whether a roof would hold. The entire atmosphere around the volcano had become a weapon. Before dawn, the surge reached Pompeii. It crossed the city walls at extraordinary speed, pouring through streets, courtyards, and rooms that were already half buried. Anyone still inside had almost no chance to react. The official archaeological evidence indicates that many of those caught by the final flows died immediately from extreme heat. Their bodies were covered by fine ash, which hardened around them. Long after the soft tissue disappeared, empty spaces remained in the volcanic deposit, preserving the positions in which people had fallen. More than 1,000 victims of the eruption have been found at Pompeii, but the city's population had probably numbered many thousands more, meaning a large proportion escaped during the long pumice phase. That matters because Pompeii is often remembered as a place where no one understood the danger. The evidence tells a more human story. People fled. People rescued relatives. People hesitated. Some made choices that saved them. Others made the same choices a few minutes too late. By morning, the streets, homes, temples, shops, and gardens had disappeared beneath layers of volcanic material. Pompeii had not been erased, it had been sealed. For centuries, Pompeii remained hidden. The landscape changed, new communities grew nearby, and the buried city passed into memory. Systematic excavation began in the 18th century, first driven as much by treasure hunting as by archaeology. Workers uncovered painted walls, mosaics, streets, food shops, bathhouses, political notices, and private graffiti. Gradually, Pompeii revealed something rare, not simply monuments built for emperors, but the texture of ordinary Roman life. In 1863, the archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli developed a method that transformed the excavation. When workers discovered cavities in the hardened ash, they poured plaster into them. The plaster filled spaces once occupied by bodies and other organic material, producing casts that captured clothing, posture, and final gestures. A little over 100 casts have been made, although many more skeletal remains have been found. They are not statues. They are archaeological records of real individuals. Today, the excavated city extends across dozens of hectares, preserving houses, public buildings, 2 theaters, an amphitheater, workshops, gardens, and inscriptions. Every doorway opens onto another fragment of a world interrupted in a single disaster. Pompeii endures because it collapses the distance between the ancient world and our own. We recognize the advertisements painted on walls, the jokes scratched into plaster, the bread left in ovens, and the rooms being repaired after earlier earthquakes. We recognize people trying to protect their families while interpreting a disaster they had no language to explain. Vesuvius did not preserve a city at its grandest. It preserved the city in progress, untidy, commercial, political, intimate, and alive. The eruption of AD 79 was a catastrophe, but the layers that destroyed Pompeii also protected an extraordinary record of the 1st century Roman world. That is why its streets still feel occupied, even when they are silent. Every wheelwright, doorway, and handwritten message carries an echo of someone who expected tomorrow to arrive. For Pompeii, it did not. For us, the buried city offers something its residents never intended to leave behind. A warning about nature, a record of survival, and a reminder that history is not made only by rulers and armies. Sometimes history is preserved in a loaf of bread, a locked doorway, or a single footprint beneath the ash. History still speaks.